Hi, hello. Welcome to the 40 Sundays YouTube channel. It has been the longest day, and I am here to talk about building and sustaining trust. Um, my 9 to 5 entails working with leadership development, and that is one thing that we talked about today was building and sustaining trust. And that had me thinking about how we do that within ourselves. And I really don't see that talked about often. And if you've seen that talked about, that's great. But I really haven't seen that talked about too much. Being in the leadership development space, of course, I've seen it talked about. But, when we talk about building and sustaining trust, I haven't really seen it talked about on a individual level when we talk about that within ourselves. So I want to talk about that tonight. And it's funny because I had the opportunity to really experience what that entailed. Not that I haven't had that experience before, but that really came into focus this week because it's been a while since I've had to work that muscle. But I'm glad I did because it just reminded me about all the things that we've talked about this week when we're talking about, rejection and how we begin to learn ourselves because we can't expect others to receive us if we haven't first accepted ourselves. And how do we start accepting ourselves? We start accepting ourselves by knowing ourselves. How do we start to know ourselves? We have to start discovering things about ourselves to love ourselves and so on and so forth. And so as we begin that process, we begin to build trust. And so with trust comes boundaries. We have to establish boundaries around that trust because those boundaries create safety for us as well. And so, really, for me, self trust means, that I'm not just listening to myself, but I'm acting on it, right? So self trust grows when you honor what you know, not just what you feel. And I'm sure we've all heard, when we talk about the way our bodies feel, how our bodies respond to people, situations, things like that. When it comes down to how we should pay attention to those things. And every ignored boundary weakens that trust. And if you do not establish strong boundaries, and if you're weak in your boundaries, you will betray yourself. And your trust within yourself will weaken, right? So, as far as the examples go for this week, I'll example one. We'll call it the nice but misaligned example. So this week I had a situation where someone was kind and well intentioned, but something felt off in my body. Nothing was wrong. Everything seemed great on paper, but the alignment wasn't there. I initially said yes to possibly meeting up. But once I got more clarity around the situation, I paused. I took note about how I was feeling in my body. And I mean, honestly, once I got clarity around the situation and that misalignment became blaring, immediately my body started to react. Immediately I could feel my body start to react to that boundary being like, wait, pause, stop. Because I knew that if I agreed to moving forward with this person, that I would have crossed my own boundary. And it would not have been his fault, it would have been mine. Because essentially, he laid out his terms and conditions, and me agreeing to go see him on those terms and conditions would have been agreeing to it. So I had to stop and pause and check in with myself. And after checking in with myself, the best thing to do was say no. And saying no wasn't about, rejecting someone. It was really about not betraying myself. Example two, we'll call this aligned but not assigned. So, in another situation, there was a real connection, and, we shared the same values, and still the answer was no. And even though even though there was several things that we were aligned on, what we have to understand that not every meaningful connection is meant to be pursued. And discernment sometimes says, this is good, but it's not mine. And, you get excited about meeting somebody that has potential. And so sometimes we're tempted to override that our logic, our sensations, the way the pause that our body is giving us, the hesitation or the signals that our body is giving us, because we're like, well, I'm getting all of these other indicators that this could be somebody that could have real potential. And so what we have to do is have clear-cut boundaries. And so with this person, it could have been really easy to allow myself to cross that boundary or drop that boundary. But in the long run, what would that have done? 6 months from now, where would I be? What would my mental state be? So, self-trust is about choosing wisdom over chemistry. And so, here's what I realized. Every time I uphold a boundary, I teach myself that I'm safe with me. And boundaries are not about walls, they're about leadership, your self leadership. And, you don't need to be dramatic, you don't need a out there reason to honor them. It's about what makes you feel safe. Another thing about discernment is that oftentimes it's more quiet or sounds quieter than desire. Peace will show up more like clarity and not excitement. They talk about the butterfly effect. If you're getting those butterflies, that's the time to stop and pause, right? So obedience doesn't always feel bold. but it does feel calm. It does feel calm. So, just in closing, I know that's a pretty quick video, but just wanted to share what it means to start, if you haven't already, or if you have created boundaries for yourself, what that means to sustain trust within yourself. So, if you're rebuilding trust with yourself, you can start here. You know, honor what you know, even if it would be easier not to. Okay. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will talk soon.